Hi guys, I am Katie from the blog Hearts Content Farmhouse, and today I am sharing with you a recipe that I'm really excited about. It is called bread machine sourdough. This is a recipe for a true sourdough that uses no commercial yeast at all, but it is a really simple technique. So it can be made in the bread machine, or it can just be kneaded by hand or in a stand mixer. The basic principle of it is that we lower the hydration to make it easier to work with, and we knead it just like a traditional yeast dough, have it do its first rise in a warm place like a traditional yeast dough, but we're just sort of lengthening out the rising times. So if you are comfortable with baking yeast breads and you want to get into sourdough, this is a great place to start because the technique is really similar to a traditional bread recipe, but you get that really good sourdough flavor without using any commercial yeast. When you first start reading about sourdough bread, it seems really confusing. There are all these different techniques you can use, like folding the dough, there's the no knead, there's overnight, there's a lot of baskets and things like that. But I wanted this recipe to be really simple. No special tools, no special ingredients, and no complicated techniques. So let me show you really quick an example. I just took this out of the oven a couple hours ago. I like to do this recipe in an oval shape, and that way you can get more evenly shaped slices and use it for like toast or sandwiches, but you can make it round or however you want. So your first step is going to be just to combine all your ingredients in a large mixing bowl. You can do this by weight or by volume. I'm going to include in the description measurements in ounces, grams, and in volume, whichever you prefer is really going to work fine. So we are going to do 3 cups of white bread flour. I like King Arthur brand. 1 cup of lukewarm water. Don't obsess about the temperature. Just lukewarm is fine. 3/4 of a cup of sourdough starter. And it's really important for this that your sourdough starter is really healthy, really bubbly, really vigorous, because it is doing all the work in this recipe. 1/2 tablespoon of sugar. So these are our first 4 ingredients. You just mix them in a mixing bowl, and it's going to look really dry. It's going to look like there's bits of flour that aren't getting worked in, and I just want you to take your hands and kind of press everything together into a ball, and it's still going to look dry. But don't add any more water. Just cover it with a towel, a damp towel, leave it out on the counter, come back in 30 minutes and check the consistency. It's going to look a little bit more hydrated, but it's still going to look dry. And I still don't want you to add any more water because it is going to get, it has a long rise. So if you add too much water, it can't keep its shape on its own and it ends up flat. So just go with it. The recipe is right. So after you've had those first 4 ingredients do their rest, you're going to add your salt in. What I like to do is put my salt in a little like ramekin and put it on top of that towel while the dough is resting, because if I don't do that, I will forget to add the salt in, and the salt is really what adds most of the flavor. So you take your bread machine or your stand mixer, however you want to knead it, pour the dough in, pour the salt in, hit your dough cycle, press start, walk away. You don't have to check anything. You don't need to come back and fold it. The bread machine is going to do all the work. So most dough cycles are going to knead for about 30 minutes with little rest periods, and then they're going to switch over to a 1-hour rise period. This dough is going to need more than a 1-hour rise period. So let the machine beep, turn itself off. That's fine. It sits there for 2 to 3 more hours, depending on the temperature of your room. This is going to be a total rise time of your dough anywhere from 3 to 4 hours, again, depending on your room temperature. It's going to look puffy. It may have almost doubled in size, but it's not going to be all the way up to the top of the bucket like a lot of bread recipes will do. It's still a sourdough, so it's rising slowly. And now we want to go ahead and prepare the baking sheet that it's going to sit on, because it's going to rise overnight in the fridge, right on the baking sheet, and then we're going to bake it on that same baking sheet in the morning. So you just get any old baking sheet, lay down a sheet of parchment paper, sprinkle cornmeal on top, and then you just shape your blob of dough into a loaf shape. Don't have to overthink this. There are little special techniques you can use to properly shape a loaf, but it honestly doesn't make that much of a difference. Make sure you aren't squishing it down. Just gently shape it into the shape you want. Either round or oval will both work. Then you cover it with greased plastic wrap. Make sure you really spray your plastic wrap because it's going to be sitting right on top of the dough. And when you peel it off, if it's stuck to the dough, it's going to stretch out the dough and ruin the shape of it. So make sure that plastic wrap is really well greased. Cover it tightly. Pop the whole thing in the fridge overnight. Anywhere from 8 hours to even up to 16 hours is going to be okay. So in the morning, after it's done its overnight rise, it's time for you to bake it. So you want to go ahead and dust the top of the loaf with flour. and then slash it. This is going to help it rise more evenly and not have like gashes where it decides where it wants to rise and the loaf splits open. So you can use just a serrated knife for this, or you can use one of the little fancy bread slashy tools. This is a kind of a low hydration dough, so you really don't need a special tool for it. Then we preheat the oven to 450 degrees. You need one rack in the middle, one rack a few rungs below it, and on that lower rack you want to put a rimmed baking sheet, an empty one. The whole point of that is that while the oven is preheating, that baking sheet gets really, really hot, and that helps to create steam when you bake. So once the oven has preheated, you pour 1 cup of water onto that empty baking sheet, and right away a bunch of steam is going to pop up. The baking sheet might buckle, that's okay. And then immediately you put your bread dough into the oven. It bakes for about 45 minutes. It's going to look very brown. The internal temperature is going to be about 200, and then you take it out to cool. You do with any sourdough, it needs a really long cooling period. This one I normally let cool for about 4 hours before I slice it, so that's why I like to bake it first thing in the morning when I get up so that it's ready in the afternoon. So this is a really simple, really good recipe. It's not going to have those really big holes that you see in some pictures. That is a characteristic of a really high hydration dough, but this is an easy to work with dough. It's great for beginners, and it's also great if you're not a beginner and you just want to have bread, homemade bread in your home every day, and you don't want it to take over your life. I've been making this every day to every other day the past couple weeks. We love it. We haven't gotten sick of it. We've been using it for everything, and it is just a great, simple technique. So I really hope you try it. I hope you like it, and if you have any questions, please leave me a comment and let me know. Thank you for watching.